He served as the head of the department chair of public administration. He is a graduate of Loyola University, which makes him Jesuit University graduate. And that's of particular significance to us at the University of San Francisco. So we welcome Dr. Llorens for today's keynote address. Thank you very much.
Please go ahead and eat. I'm going to try to keep you a little bit entertained while you eat. And usually I wind up having a long presentation, prepared on a lot of things, and about 75% of the time my wife is in the audience telling me to shut up. That I'm talking too long. Let me give you, but I do want to enjoy the opportunity to be here. Let me expand a little bit more in terms of why I appreciate being here. First of all, I got this call from a former colleague, Dr. Ron Harris, who's on the faculty now at USF, and he put me in touch with Gleb. And Ron called and said, "Do you think you'd be interested in coming to speak to the Teaching PA conference?" And I said, "Yeah, I think I can make it. Depends on when it is." And he said, "Well, it's here in San Francisco." I said, "I'll adjust my schedule and I'll make it work." And it is coming in at a busy time. We're just about starting summer school back on campus. Let me just sort of give you another little quick background into my experience. I was at Southern University for about 20 years teaching public administration, political science, chairing the public administration department. Before I did that, I was a local government administrator. Did that for about 8 or 9 years. Director of Human Services, Director of Intergovernmental Relations, Director of Human Resources. Made that switch over to academia, did that for about 20 years, and then 2.5 years ago decided it was time to go back to local government. That good friend was the mayor of the city of Baton Rouge. She'd be calling me saying, "Why don't you come back and do some work in local government?" I thought it was about time to make the move. So I went back and spent 2.5 years as an assistant chief administrative officer in the city of Baton Rouge. And then about 2 years ago now, I got a call when there was a search for transfer for some friends asked me if I would consider putting my name in the hat for that. I had done that once before based on them telling me I should do it, and it didn't work out. So I had a little argument with my wife. She finally said, "Go ahead and do it." She really did not went against her wishes and did it. But that gives me this background, I think, in terms of what Gleb and Ron asked me to speak about, was this moving back and forth between administration and education. This back between practitioner and making that transition from a practitioner to an education. So to give you an idea of just kind of what we have in the audience, how many of you are in major research institutions? Right? MPA programs. Most of your MPA programs. All right. How many are been practitioners before? Great. Okay. Was it easy? No. It was difficult for me. Let me tell you how I got into administration. I was director of human resources for the city of Baton Rouge. I had a call from a friend of mine who was dean of the School of Public Policy at Southern, and asked if I would come in and teach a course. And I had a master's at the time, not a PhD. I told her I hadn't taught before. And she said, "I want you to teach urban economics." I said, "I don't know anything about urban economics." I said, "That's all right. Just take books, stay 2 chapters ahead. Students and you'll do fine." I did that, and I survived, but I don't know how well the students survived. I don't know how much I got across to them, because I knew very little about it. I was trying to learn as I went in. So that's not a good model to follow. Once I got into it, I decided this is something I like. Started working on a PhD, and my plan really was to probably stay in government, teach on the side, and at that point, then something happened with a change of administration. New mayor come in, and he made the part of that decision for me and decided, maybe it's time to make a complete move in academia. So I did that. Switched over into full-time over at Southern University while finishing the dissertation. Ironically, I finished the dissertation and immediately the dean at the time, this is the new dean, asked if I would be chair because of my administration background. So here I am, newly minted PhD, and all of a sudden I'm chair of the Department of Political Science. I did that for a few years, teaching PA while I was doing it, and then another dean came in and said, why are you in political science? You should be in public administration. So I switched over and became chair of public administration. So my tenure, my years as a true faculty member are very limited. It's been as a chair for a number of years, both political science, public administration, and dean of graduate school, back into government. But I had this idea, and I ran into a couple of folks here that attended a conference in San Antonio, where were we? McAllen. We were in McAllen for a conference of minority public administration, and I spoke to that group. And I talked to them about a term that I remember in a comparative politics class called pontifex. And it was a French term in terms of how the French had this transition between the public and the private sector. And they moved fluidly between the two. And the idea was that it would help, that the experience in one would help the experience in the other. And I think that's what the idea and what we should be considering in public administration. And when we talk about this transition between practice and teaching, is that it should be more fluid. That it should be this opportunity. NASPA realizes that. When we look at what NASPA has changed the standards. I'm going through some of these things real quick. I have a bunch of notes here. And I'm going to do this kind of very informative as opposed to going through this. But the change in the accreditation focus competency instead of just subject matter. And the competencies that they're listed: lead and manage in public governance, participate and contribute to the policy process, analyze, synthesize, think critically, solve problems, make decisions. And NASPA recognizes that public administrators face an increasingly diverse, changing workforce and citizenry. So NASPA gets it. I know at the time when I was chair of PA and when I went through a few accreditation visits, and I see my friend Blue Woolrich sitting back there. Blue, I'm not going to mention our accreditation visit. We was at in New Orleans, I'm not going to mention it again. Yeah. And it wasn't our accreditation visit, it was the after hours that I won't talk about. But those things were based on were you teaching the right courses? Did you have the right coursework? Was your curriculum covering all of these topics that they thought were relevant? But I don't think they really addressed these competencies, so I applaud NASPA on addressing these competencies. Then, how do you do that, and how do you marry that into your curriculum? And how do you marry that with bringing in practitioners? How do you bring in practitioners that can actually convey, transmit those qualities that they've earned as a practitioner into the classroom? When I first became chair of public administration, I had a couple of practitioners that were teaching. One was a pretty good friend of mine at the time. When I started looking at the coursework, we started talking to the students, we started looking at grades that were all straight A's. Every student in the class making A's. So, there's a problem here. So this practitioner decided that this was just a little sideline job. Really wasn't putting the effort into it. So even though he was a good friend, and we canceled the contract, we canceled another contract. And I think what happens, and what we have to be very concerned about, and I say we in public administration, is that don't put people in the situation I was put in. Saying, here's a textbook, here's what you have to do. We have to marry the skill sets, the knowledge that the practitioners bring make sure that that's what's being transmitted to the students, but at the same time, we as, and I say we now because I can make that transition, but we as teachers, as researchers, we have to make sure that these practitioners understand how to be effective in the classroom. They have to understand how to participate in this process in a public administration program, that they can transfer the knowledge and skills that they have to those students. One of the things that, being away from administration for 20 years and then coming back into administration, is I got a chance, I think, to see what I was producing. It's one of the, got back to the mayor's office, one of the divisions that reported to me was human resources. Interestingly enough, when I made the switch to the university the first time from a director of human resources position, I had a student that was an undergrad of mine, then a grad student said he wanted to get in human resources. I had only been away from the city for a short time, so I called the director of human resources replacement and said, I have this guy, wants to be an intern in human resources, why don't you give him a chance and hire him? And they did. When I got back 20 years later, that young man was the assistant director for human resources on an interim basis, and I don't know whether the director was trying to get just get in good with him, but as soon as I came, she took the interim off and said, look, I think I'm going to make Brian permanent. But when I left, he was the interim director of human resources. So I got an idea to see what qualities that he taught that made this young man successful. And at the same time, I got an opportunity, because I started hiring interns from our program, and get an idea of what skill sets they were bringing in. What were we producing? What were we teaching them? And how is that transferring into what they were, how effective they were? And I think I saw at that point how critical it was to marry this practice and marry, I don't want to call it theory. I want to call it something in terms of a knowledge, building up a knowledge of skill. Because when we're teaching PA, what's critical are the skill sets that those students learn in terms of analytical skills, communication skills. They have to be taught that. They have to be taught that by individuals that are trained, qualified. They have to understand the theory behind public administration. And that's critical. Then the practitioners come in and say, here's what you're going to have to do once you actually get into the workforce. One of the problems I had in making that initial transition was that I came from an environment that you got to the point, you got the information, you made a decision, and that was it. When I got to the classroom, that was a difficult transition for me because I was used to doing things in a very, very brief and concise manner. And I started working on a PhD, and when I started writing, folks said, you have to expand a little bit. I said all I had to say. When folks were talking about the research they were doing, and my colleagues said, well, I'm spending my time on this research. This is a question I want to ask myself. My answer was that I already know the answer. I just got out of this stuff. This is what's going to happen, and this is what we do, and this is why we do it. And I couldn't understand why they were taking so much time to study about it. So just ask me. As my wife tells me all the time, just ask me. Why are you going through all of these questions and meetings? Just ask me what the answer is. And that's this disconnect, I think, that pure practitioners have with scholars. I battle with my son. My son is a PA scholar. Okay? Most people now, when I go to PA conferences, they ask me if I'm Jared's dad. They don't ask me if Jared is my son. They say, are you Jared's dad? He's a associate professor of PA at LSU. Some of you may have come in contact with him, very active in the field, in the PA field, but he's a scholar. He's one that spends a lot of time on research, but he also brought a practical skill to it because he spent 4 or 5 years, I guess, in the Office of Personnel Management at the federal level before he decided to go on and do the PhD. He thought think he did it because he thought that it was a good life based on seeing me having a lot of free time, or what he thought was free time. And that changed. Some of the problems that I had in making that switch back and forth, one of the things I had to deal with when I first got to the city of Baton Rouge, when I went back to the past time, is dealing with former colleagues. I had, one of the first things I had to deal with was a colleague that had been assigned a research grant by a former student. So he was a former student of mine that had gotten into a position to award a research grant to a former colleague of mine. And I got in, all of a sudden the federal agency was saying, we're not paying for this, we're not reimbursing you because this is not a very good research project. This isn't what we wanted, this isn't what we asked for, so we're not paying for it. So I'm faced with the challenge of paying a professor for a project and the city not getting their money back, so the city, the mayor wasn't going to look along that too kindly. So it took a little bit of negotiation going back, and I read the research projects, and I agreed with the federal agency. And said, you know, this doesn't work. This isn't what is being asked for. So we had to negotiate, and we got out, and we finally agreed with them on that. You know, those are some of the challenges that I had to face in making that switch back and forth between administration and back and forth between teaching. I believe here's what's important. I believe that the experience I had in government made me a better teacher. When I first went into the classroom, I think it gave the students that I taught, the students that I prepared for careers in PA, better understanding of what they were going to be facing. Yeah. I look at being in this situation for now for the past 20-some years, and I'm constantly running into former students now because Baton Rouge, where we're located, is state government, so we have a large local government workforce, a large state government workforce, so I'm running into former students all the time. And now they're in positions of influence, now they're in leadership positions. You know, one of the things that they would come up to me and say, you know, one of the things I appreciate from you that you always did one thing, you always ask why. You know, whenever they make presentations, you know, and I concentrated on short presentations, I concentrated on memos rather than research papers. I concentrated on teamwork, team projects as opposed to single individual type projects. And when they presented it and presented ideas, they used to laugh because I was constantly sitting there saying, why? Until we got down to the core of what the impact of it was. Okay? And so that's helped us. So these ideas that what we do in government are critical, and what we do in academia is critical, and marrying those two is even more critical. Everything is changing. You know, I don't know about you, but at our university, we're being, other than being cut tremendously in terms of funding, as I'm sure all of you are, but we're also being forced to look at how are we responding to the workforce demands of our state. Are we producing graduates that are qualified for positions that the state is looking to fill? So it's not just a matter of, we're being funded based on the number of completers, our retention rate, our graduation rates. But the governor and the state governors also say, are you producing graduates prepared to go out and meet the needs? Because as they're recruiting economic development projects and companies coming in, those companies want to know that we're producing graduates, that we're producing people that are prepared to respond to their needs. That's why I think I'm excited about what NASCA is doing with changing these competencies and changing these things. So, am I going too far? Tell me if I'm going too long. Now, Blue, throw something at me. All right. So I'm going through this pretty quickly. We're sure what kind of a time limit I have, so trying to catch up on some of these things. One of the things that we've had to do, as I got to university, one of the things that's helped me as I left state government, got to university, and I had a discussion with a gentleman right before I came in. He was actually questioning some of the decisions, not questioning, he was asking for information on decisions that I had to make as a chancellor. In terms of reductions, in terms of staff reductions, in terms of faculty reductions, in terms of furloughs. When I came to the university, the first thing I had to do was cut $10 million out of the budget. Next year, another $5 to $6 million. This year, my legislature is about to end in one more week. I don't know what's going to happen out of there. We finally have a legislature that's fighting the government, so we might come out of it, even though he's cutting our budget. We might come out of it with enough of an additional appropriation so that we have a standstill. But I think I was a better chancellor going into that situation, coming from at least a break of 2.5 years and going into local government. Decision making, is it quicker? I don't know, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. I would prefer to be able to do things quicker. As I became chancellor, I couldn't do that. I believe in this thing called shared governance. We don't always agree. In fact, the Senator and I don't always agree on everything, but they will never tell you that they're not at the table and they're not part of the discussions and they're not part of the recommendation that we want to make. Government runs slowly. The first day I stepped into the mayor's office was right after Hurricane Gustav. We'd gone through Hurricane Gustav 3 or 4 months earlier. I walked in there and said, we have a $34 million recovery budget, a federal grant for recovery. Here it is. It's your responsibility to decide your priorities, what we're going to do with it, how we're going to spend it, but let's get it done quickly. So good, I can spend $34 million quickly. Well, when I left 2.5 years later, we probably had about half of it spent. Just about 4 or 5 months ago, I was invited to a groundbreaking ceremony for a homeless center that was funded out of that $34 million. It only took 4 years for it to be built. We have to work quicker. We have to be more efficient. We have to take that efficiency out of government. We have to put it into higher education. And we have to build into our curriculum those skill sets necessary for that. So that's where, I sort of want, I'm giving you sort of an encapsulated version of about 13 or 14 pages of notes. And I'm sure you didn't want to listen to those 13 or 14 pages of notes. But I like this format. I like this opportunity here to sort of talk on an informal basis. I'm open, Gleb, I don't know what your time frame is, time limit is. I'd like to have an open discussion, questions, whatever. I don't want to spend a lot of time up here just kind of spouting through all of these things. But if you want to talk about experiences that you've had in making that transition, that you may have had personally, or as you may have experienced with other practitioners coming into the field of public administration, how do you feel that it works? I'm open to it. I'm open to questions, comments, criticisms, whatever.
Thanks. I'm Steve Cage from the University of Washington, the Evans School.
Yes.
And a couple things that you brought up bring to mind two questions. One is, when, as an academic, when we brought practitioners in to teach, one of the challenges that we sometimes face is helping them move beyond the war story. Right. And so one of the things that I really liked about your talk was that you had the anecdote and then you had the why. Right? Why is this significant, or how did I learn from this, or what does the audience need to take away from this? And you clearly emphasize that with students. Do you have any suggestions for sort of gentle, supportive ways to help our colleagues think more critically about how they teach, and also about how to encourage the students to do that critical thinking that comes from asking why, beyond simply sort of, you know, relating the good stories that the students took up. Second question would be, do you have suggestions for those of us moving in the other direction for how to speed up our thinking and our analysis processes, right? You joked about sort of looking at your academic colleagues on the academic side and how they needed to, you know, take months to figure out something that you already had the snap answer to from the practitioner world. How does it work in reverse? You know, are there ways that we who are prone to analysis can telescope our thinking a little bit and cut to the chase a little bit more? Okay. So you can take those in any order. Those are my two thoughts.
Yeah, let me start on the second one. And you're right, it's one of the things that I think you have to be, as you engage in your research, as you engage in the investigation of topics or the interesting topics that you have, pull a practitioner in. Pull a practitioner in early. Pass the ideas by. You know, say, look, this is what I'm looking at. You know, this is what I think, you know, are factors that would impact a certain policy or a certain policy process. You know, let me know what you think about it. But you know, what's been your experience in that particular area? Are there some of the things when I sat down with my colleagues and started thinking about it, that I think the value I brought to it was being able to introduce other factors into the equation that they had not thought about. And it's, you know, it was, you know, usually, I mean, you tend to go back and look at, you know, the literature, look at what other people have done. You may say, I want to introduce some other things. I want to see what other factors are going to impact the outcome of this particular process. Pass that by that practitioner. You know, say, you know, give me your input. What do you think about it? But, you know, like I said, you have to be careful because practitioners tend to think they know a lot of everything. And a lot of times they don't. You know, it becomes a thought that they're well versed in the issues depending on where they're coming from. But the other thing is make sure that they stay within their field of knowledge, the field of expertise. You know, if it's human resources, stay within human resources. The other thing in terms of the war stories, I mean, I think that's a very real problem. You know, I tried not to do it. I knew I got into it. You know, and it's you know, it's a way of using real life experiences as a teaching method, but you don't want to spend your whole classroom or your class time period. You know, when I was chair, I relied on students coming to me. And you know, the students would give me feedback. You know, say, what did you learn? You know, from so-and-so. And they say, well, most of the time he's telling us or she's telling us stories about what they're doing, you know, or filling us in on what they have done in their offices and what's going on currently in their offices. And very little in terms of really building skills that they need or skills they should be bringing out of that particular course. So I think it's incumbent upon either the person's fellow colleagues, fellow academics, department chairs, deans to really evaluate what's going on in the classroom from a practitioner, especially. I mean, I think you have practitioners that, in some cases, I think we have to be careful not to put them in a situation they really are not competent in. You know, you have to evaluate very carefully what skill sets those practitioners are bringing in. You know, if it's